My name's Dan Daniels. I'm Assistant Program Director for Buckaloo Programs. In fact, I think I have the greatest job in the world. Okay, I enjoy my job. When I see the work that we do, the end result of placing people, I am just so overwhelmed and so elated until every day I go to work with a smile on my face. I would like to also acknowledge some of my colleagues here from the Department of Rehab, Rena Ranahan, who actually used to work with Buckaloo Programs. I still consider her I would say the best employment development or job developer there is, but I'm still alive. But she's really good at what she does. Okay, and to give you a little bit of background about myself, I've spent most of my life. I'm fortunate enough to say that I've been employed consecutively for over 40 years. Okay, without a break in employment in 40 years. So that does show that I know how to get and keep a job. Also, I worked 26 years for the Department of Corrections. So therefore, I've always been a servant of the people. I've worked with sex offenders, lifers. I was a lifer counselor in California Medical Facility. I also had the pleasure of working with Dr. Anita Gilbert at the Oakland Parole Units, I believe it was. We shared many clients together. But that's enough about me. Okay, a lot of the stuff you may hear from me will sound repetitive. Okay, so if we could go to the first slide. Okay, why work? Can you hear me all? Can you hear me? That's better?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay, why work? Evidence-based practices have shown that nothing helps people turn their lives around the way having a real job does. Okay? When working, people feel better about themselves, they develop self-confidence, and increase motivation for managing their mental illness with integrated and broader community supports. Now, there's one thing I can guarantee. There is not a person in this room that has not needed some support on their job, in their life, in one way or another. If you have not, I guarantee you before your life ends, you will need some supports. So it is very important for people to have supports. Next. It is more stressful for a person not to work. The majority of people with mental illness do want to work. When you look at the unemployment rate for people with mental illness, it is off the chart. Okay, today's unemployment rate on a national basis is about 12% nationwide. In the state of California, we've moved up to about 11% unemployment rate. For people with mental illness, it's closer to 90% unemployment. And people do want to work. Clients develop greater motivation to cut down their substance use and to better manage their mental illness when employed. Our program is what is considered a harm reduction model program. And what we feel is though if you are at work, that is a period when you will not be doing harm to yourself. Most of our clients that come in have dual diagnosis. They have substance problems as well. Next slide. Okay, famous quote, find the good and praise it. My boss likes that, Shelly likes that. That's a very good Marshall. And that is a really good quote. Next. There are 6 principles of supportive employment. Eligibility is based on the consumer choice, and I too am alternating consumer as well as client. And supported employment is integrated with treatment. Competitive employment is the goal. Rapid job search is used, and job finding is individualized. It's a follow-along support, and it's continuous. Next slide. An employment specialist carries out all phases of vocational service. The employment specialists are part of the mental health treatment team with shared decision making. No eligibility requirements such as job readiness or lack of substance abuse and mild symptoms. The search for competitive job occurs rapidly after programs entry. The first contact with an employer is usually within the first month. Next slide. I mean, what we know is that it is very important for people in life to have purpose. Okay, so if you wake up every day and you really have no purpose, then that to me would be extremely depressing. We lose it. Maybe I'm talking too fast. Okay, so let's see, where were we?
Highlight second page and just highlights.
Okay. Oh yeah, highlights. Employer contacts are based on client's job preferences. In other words, we don't, if you put a person on a job and say, okay, the only job I can find for you is developing widgets, okay? And that person hates widgets, okay? May have a mental illness that says every time I see a widget, it's making me do stuff. That person is not going to be successful. See, the key to this is the assessment, finding what the individual wants to do. Our eligible criteria is that you're 18 years of old, you must have a major mental illness, and it's your choice and your desire to work. Then what we do, we go into pre-employment services, vocational assessments, and that's the part I really love, okay? Because this is the part where we get a client that comes in our office, okay? And it's our opportunity to make this transformation, okay? Because while they're in that office, we are assessing them. We are looking at what skills they have, how their mental illness is affecting them, or how it is blocking their ability to work in the community. And then we start to affect change. We do stuff like with the vocational assessments. We can do various assessments to determine where a person is best suited in this career life. We do a lot of employment prep, resume development, master application, interview technique, okay, assistance with work attire and job search skills. And that's where the transformation, people come in and they've never been in front of an interview before. But to have the support of an employment specialist that sits there and guides you through that process makes the whole game a whole lot easier to play. We develop employment contacts. Okay, we also, and then I wanted to get on the work accommodations. Okay, I try not to ask for work accommodations when I go in there, because when I'm dealing with the employer, okay, and I'm bringing the client to work, I have two clients, okay, because my client is the individual that wants to hire our clients and the individuals that support our clients. That's why I would encourage you saw the video. If you need office supplies, go to Staples. They do hire people with mental illness. Go to Safeway. You want to support the organizations that do support people that have processes and that have illnesses. Now, when you start talking about reasonable accommodations, one of my colleagues from Community Mental Health has kind of coined a phrase that we utilize, okay, that when you look at a person, because the thing about mental illness, you can't always look at a person and determine whether or not they have a mental illness. But now if you look at somebody and you say, well, something ain't right, then you have an idea that you may have to go into that employer and say, we may need a reasonable accommodation. But we try not to do that process. That's why I do a lot of education of businesses and companies. In fact, if I had $100 for every employer that asked me a question or asked one of our clients a question that was improper, I'd have a lot of money, okay? Because I can't tell you, I've had employers say, well, how old are you? What's his mental illness? That's nobody's business. That disclosure piece belongs to the individual. It totally belongs to the individual. That's why we started, one of our entities is called Blue Skies Personnel Services. And that was established because I have a lot of clients that say, you know what, Dan, I really want to go to work. However, I don't want everybody to know that I have a mental illness. Okay? The stigma is so negative to that. And that's something that we all need to be working on, because statistics show that 40% of the American population that's not incarcerated is taking some form of medication to deal with a mental illness. So that's why we really have got to get over and the stigma thing, okay? And that's where the Blue Skies personnel came from. Then I can actually go in and I can deal with employers. And what I speak to is I speak to the person's ability, not the person's disability. And that's all they need to know, okay? If you get a situation where you realize the guy he will need an accommodation, then that's when we can go in there and we can try and do that. And all the legal stuff I say for our lawyers here, and thank God for them, because that, sometimes it's really necessary. If we don't have advocates that advocate for us, again, back to what I said earlier, everybody in this room has had some support one way or another finding employment. We also provide different classes. We have a wonderful class called Wellness in the Workplace, which assists with symptoms identification and symptoms management. We also have, and you should know that the majority, there's so many people with mental illness that smoke, okay? They smoke cigarettes like you would not believe. We also offer smoke cessation groups. We also offer a wellness recovery action plan. Okay, you all talked earlier, what do you do when a person he's on a job, he or she is on a job, they're doing real well. We help them develop a RAP plan so that when the symptoms are starting to kick in, what do you do? How do you deal with it? Okay, what preparation have you made? You've been diagnosed with schizophrenia. You have this going on, and now all of a sudden, this is cropping up. So we try and help people put together a RAP plan. And we also offer stress management. We call it stress management, but the truth is it's anger management, because a lot of people are angry. And this helps them get through, especially, whatever life is whatever life is putting in front of you. And we also offer a job retention class, and that is for people that have been employed for quite a while. I was with Shelley, my supervisor, one day, and she introduced me to a lady that she had placed in the community over 10 years ago. And the woman had, not only had she been successful in the job, she had actually risen to the level of director in her particular field. So when those type of things occur, that's when I know that this is what we should be doing. This is the right thing. And again, that retention club is something that we put together so that people can get together, and we want it peer ran, okay? But we do bring an employment specialist in there to help deal with it. But for it to be peer ran, because we want people to start to be able to work out what their needs are. Okay, we also support service options of education and community training. We collaborate with educational institutions when education is required to support an individual's employment. Let's see. We also partner with a program called the PACE program, which is a dual diagnosis program. Because like I said, a lot of people that come in, they're dealing with a mental illness, they're dealing with substance abuse, they're dealing with so many factors. So we need to be able to wrap our arms around them and provide them supports in many, many areas, in many ways. Again, if the slide was up, you'd see another famous quote: "The harder I work, the luckier I get." Who said that? All right, Thomas Jefferson. Oh, we have a winner. You can have a piece of candy. Okay, again, like I say, I started Blue Skies Personnel Service. I also established what is called Blue Skies Personnel Service Employer Advisory Committee. And this is what I would recommend everybody do. We have got to start building partners with the employment community, okay? We've got to be able to tell people that, just because a person has a mental illness, they can work, they can be productive. Most companies don't want to go through the hiring process. They want to have an employer, they want that employer to stay and build their company forever. okay? And so if we can try and help them do that, then we have done our jobs. And so by putting together a group of employers to give feedback, and what it has done is now I now have a list of employers that I can contact, and I say, okay, I got this person, we've got a bio company, maybe if I get somebody in that field. I tell this story a lot. When I first started with Buckaloo Programs, I had a young man that used to walk through the halls all the time, and he would be playing Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, and I mean, that's all he do is play Dungeons and Dragons. And so I racked my brain and I said, what can I do? How can I help this individual become successful? So I got him a job as a video game tester. Okay, perfect gig for him. That young man stayed on that job for 3 years. Okay, the company closed. It didn't close. They relocated and moved to Los Angeles. However, they did extend him an invitation to transfer. Okay, so that to me that's what we're about. And so even though he didn't go there, he's still working, and now he has moved forward with his educational plan to become going into game design. So we just need to explore what people want and try and help them and support them in doing so. And so I really thank you all for this time. I'm sorry I had to rush through it, but I do thank you. And if you have any questions, and last but not least, buckalooprograms.org. Okay?
Where's it located?
We're located in the beautiful county of Marin in San Rafael. All right, thank you so much.
What was that? BuckalooEmploymentServices.org?
Yes, BUCKELEW.org.
So it is actually a little bit after 4 o'clock right now, and I'm not sure how many more, how much more time our speakers can give us. But if anybody has any questions, I think that lady.
Yes, I have a question for Claudia. Is there a limit as to how many reasonable accommodations a person can ask for at one job? And can more than one accommodation be requested on the same doctor's note, or do they have to be separate?
Basically, the answer to the first question is no. There's no limitation. There's actually some good case law in our jurisdiction that talks about how the duty to accommodate is an ongoing obligation, and just because the employer provides one accommodation doesn't mean they're off the hook. It's an ongoing obligation, and if one accommodation is not enough, the employer needs to consider doing, multiple accommodations. And the same doctor's note could support, multiple accommodations. At the same time, there's a practical issue where I think if you're the employee, you want to look as though you're in good faith. You don't want to come in with a laundry list of, 27, but certainly there could be a request for more than one.
Thank you.
This gentleman up here has a question.
I have a practical question for Claudia. Sorry. Let's say if someone who are on the job for several years, and then all of a sudden, and they get a relapse or breakdown, and then but the person has been seeing the psychiatrist, the doctor, and therapy for a long time, and if that person is getting through the process, going to personnel department and get a form and fill out, and also doctor is right, the person a worker compensation, not worker, I'm sorry, is the short-term disability, and when the person or the peer going back to the workforce or going back to the workplace, and if someone asks, let's say the supervisor or the co-worker asks, oh, how come you are not here for the past 3 months? What do you do? And what do your recommendation for that person to address that kind of situation?
That's a really good question and a very common fact scenario. It's very common for people to work for many years and months and then have a period where they're ill and where they need to be out on a leave of absence and then are able to return to work. In fact, the fact that a person has a long work history is predictive that yes, they will recover and return to work. It's a predictive plus factor. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it. I think it's going to be very individual for the person. I do think that it's important to prepare. People are going to, want to know because people care about their coworkers. It's not necessarily nosiness, or it could be. I think that, some people are comfortable saying, oh, I was ill, but I'm better now and I'm ready to be back at work. Other people might say I had some personal affairs to attend to. Sometimes people might want to tell a white lie. I think it's okay to tell a white lie to your coworkers, but you definitely don't want to tell a white lie to human resources or to your supervisor. But I think it's, for a coworker, it would be okay to say I was, helping my mother or, whatever. But with human resources and your supervisor, you definitely want to be accurate and, they are supposed to maintain that confidentially. I know that's not always true, but that is what the law says.
Okay, thank you.
And just following in that vein, I'm sorry, this sounds like this is something that anyone who is experiencing this needs to develop a strategy in going back to work. So I was wondering if maybe Dan and Dr. Gilbert can say what it is you would make in terms of advice to this a person in this situation.
Well, it's pretty much just like any standard deal, okay? I've been with Buckler programs for almost 5 years, okay? I just had knee surgery, okay? I had to go ask them for some accommodation, okay? If you've got an employer that's been with the company for a while, and so they're starting to have a break, then what's wrong with going in and saying, hey, I need time off? And in our case, what we do, when the clients come to us, our service is for life, okay? So if we have an individual that's been working with the company for 4 or 5 years or longer, and they say, hey, you know what, my symptoms are up, then we're gonna try and get them some support, and we will go to that employer with the individual and see if we cannot gain a reasonable accommodation for that period.
From a clinical perspective, in terms of someone who's returning to work after an illness, again, the safety factor, making sure that they're safe, that they're stabilized, particularly if they're on medication, that they're stabilized on medication, that depending on what kind of environment they're returning to, that there's a good support system there, hopefully on the job. If not on the job, if it happens to be a toxic environment that they're returning to, that there is a support system, external, if not internal. And what I mean by that is a support group, as well as, maybe other peers or friends whom they can communicate and talk to about stressors that may exist on the job. But the safety and stabilization are key factors.
So I think this person has a question. She's had her hand up for a while, and then this gentleman up here, and then. I'm very sorry about the technical difficulties we've had today.
I think this question is either for Claudia Center or Stephen Bruce, who wrote this handout about the defining disability more broadly, effective in 2009. And I'm a little confused about the episodic or in remission versus a trance before. It looked like under the old ADA, transitory meant 6 months or less, that wouldn't be covered under the ADA. And now I'm a little confused about how to read this. It says, they would be covered if they're episodic or in remission, as long as they're substantially limiting while they're active. But then I'm just a little confused on this new one, so I'd like some clarification. Thank
Sure.
you.
This goes back to this sort of many years of battles around the definition of disability, which are so counterintuitive and bizarre that I won't even try to summarize it for you. But one of the challenges was that people who were doing really well because either they were on a medication that was working, or they had recovered, or they were in remission with their conditions, even when they faced explicit discrimination, the courts are saying, well, you're not really substantially limited because you're doing fine, or you're doing okay. And that this is more under the federal statute than under our state law. So one of the amendments that was made was that if your condition is in remission or is episodic, but it would be substantially limiting if it were in its active phase, then you're considered to still be a person with a disability who's protected and gets reasonable accommodation should you need them, and protection against discrimination. What the questioner was asking about is there's sort of a rule of thumb, such as it is, that substantially limiting includes some sort of temporal time element. In other words, your condition would have to be somehow, several months or maybe 6 months. And I think that time concept would still probably exist, but it would become a bit more hypothetical. For example, it might be, well, if my condition were active, how long would it last? So it becomes a bit more hypothetical now. And so I don't think anyone knows the answer, but the intent, I think it's a very actually sophisticated question, because it's about these sort of two aspects of the statute that haven't been reconciled yet. But I think that the intent is to cover conditions that go in and out of active states. That was the intent of the language.
I'm sorry, Spencer.
I probably don't need it after that.
Actually, I had two questions for Dan. One is, what or who is PACE, the PACE program? What does it stand for? And the second question is, who pays for your services? The client or the employer? How does that work?
We're funded through several sources. We're funded through Department of Rehabilitation. We're funded by community mental health, grants and other funding sources, as well as we have donors that donate to our services, as well as we have people that walk in the door and just pay for services. But we have a variety of it. And in terms of the PACE program, Shelley, you know what that acronym is for?
I think it's Promise, Acceptance, Compassion, and Empowerment. It's a dual diagnosis drop-in group. It's funded through Medi-Cal.
How does someone who needs, who believes that they need an animal to accompany them to the workplace, how do they go about getting that, request accommodated? And what if the employer says no and that kind of thing?
Well, out in sort of more public spaces, usually then you're talking about a service animal as opposed to a service or a companion animal. And, well, we could have a whole debate on that, but we won't. A service animal is usually supposed to be, an animal that's trained to perform some sort of function or task for the individual with a disability. So sometimes there's battles about whether the animal meets that prerequisite. But in general, the idea is that unless the employer can show some real, undue hardship, the animal is supposed to be permitted on the site, on the work site.
And would the employer also require some sort of doctor's note?
They could ask for reasonable medical documentation that the person is using the animal due to disability.
I think there's a question up here next.
I just have a quick question for Claudia Center. A quick question for you, Claudia. On the 10 diagnoses that you were talking about, is OCD one of those?
Yeah, that was just me being shorthand in my language. What I meant was that, the basic, DSM diagnoses that we all know, as well as lots that we don't know, are probably going to be, covered under the FEHA and now the amended ADA, and certainly OCD is one that has been covered quite a number of times in published cases in our jurisdiction, and I would have no doubt is covered.
Do we have any more questions?
That is a great question. Is pregnancy a disability? The short answer is no, but there's actually a longer answer, and the longer answer is that in California there's sort of a complicated web of laws that provide women with time off from work related to pregnancy. And we have something called the Pregnancy Disability Leave Law, and that's for when people become disabled by pregnancy, meaning in that context, you know how disability means different things in different settings, they're unable to work. So you can get this pregnancy disability leave, and that's a certain kind of leave under state law. And then you can also get your family CFRA leave, and then you can get your CFRA bonding leave. And then sometimes people who are pregnant, if they have postpartum depression or post-delivery disabilities, then it would count as a disability, you know, in the way we've been talking about it today. So there can be conditions related to pregnancy that would be a disability in the way that we've been talking about it today.